Second episode of the Dan Wickline Show, and I am your host, Alanis Morissette. And I want to start off by saying thank you, India. Now, today we got a lot of news to get to, and while I usually like to start off on an upbeat note, maybe a joke, which is not what I just said, I do have to start off on a down note, and that is word has come out today that we have lost comic artist Jesse Ham has passed away. Jesse was known for his work on some Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and Dynamite books. His Plants vs. Zombie run over at Dark Horse, filling in on a Hawkeye issue with Matt Fraction and Steve Lieber, and many other things, including some Flash Gordon work with Dynamite. Jesse's wife, Anna, broke the news today on Twitter, saying that her husband suffered a blood clot in his lungs, and he is no longer with us. So our condolences to the Ham family and to his friends, and so sorry to say about that. Going to move into other topics. Yesterday we were talking about the Venom trailer. My shoulder's still a little kink, so I'm still working that out. Sorry, guys. Andy Serkis was talking about, he did a kind of a director's commentary for the Venom trailer that dropped, and while we picked up a lot of the stuff from it, one of the things we missed is that the character of Detective Mulligan that he pointed out. Well, it seems that Mulligan is a character from the comics, and kind of an important character from the comics. He is basically the character that becomes Toxin, another major symbiote. This one where Carnage is an offspring of Venom, Toxin is an offspring of Carnage. So it is, it's pretty straightforward there, but looks like there's a possibility we'll get another symbiote in the movie, or at least set it up for the third movie. So that was kind of interesting, and we missed that. Another thing we talked about yesterday was Knives Out 2, The Murder Spree Continues, whatever we want to call it, and how it's added Dave Bautista and Ed Norton to the cast. Well, again, they've reached out, and now they've got Janelle Monáe, the singer, songwriter, recording artist, model, actress, just does everything. She's joined the cast. You may know her from the movie Antebellum or Moonlight or Hidden Figures. So that's another great name adding to the cast. That's what that kind of movie is. It's a big ensemble piece with huge names, and that's the newest one added. So I have a feeling that just about every day I pop up here, I'm probably going to have another name to add for a while until they actually start filming and, we get a release and an actual title. Another thing that came up today, and this is kind of interesting, is Variety is reporting that China's state-run movie channel, because all the movies in China are controlled by the government propaganda department, what gets released, and only a handful of American movies get made or released in China. Well, they released basically information on 8 Marvel movies that are going to be released between now and 2023. The problem is that there are going to be 10 Marvel movies released in that time. The 2 that were missing from the list are the Eternals, which didn't surprise anybody, because Chloe Zhao is currently part of a media blackout going on in China. Even though she won an Oscar being born in China, you would think that the Chinese government would be hyping her up. But she's been very vocal about growing up in the country and the government, and they don't allow that kind of stuff to be talked about in their country. So there's a good chance that the Eternals will not be released in China because of who directed it. Now, Marvel does pretty well kind of getting these things by their censors. They're sensitive to it. In this case, it may not work. But the other movie that is not being given a release date and it's going to have to be negotiated quickly if it is going to get in there, is Shang-Chi. Now, Shang-Chi is using the Mandarin as the bad guy, and we know the Chinese government is not happy with that character, which is part of, well, rumor says that's part of why they did the bait and switch in Iron Man 3. So they teased the Mandarin, but he wasn't actually an Asian. He wasn't Chinese, So Marvel seems to be pretty confident that with the way they're treating the character, they're calling him Wing Wu in all the trailers and stuff like that. They don't ever say the name Mandarin, at least that we've seen so far. But it may not get past the Chinese censors. So it's possible Shang-Chi will not be released in China. So that's a huge market. I mean, that is a giant part of the market, and that will definitely hurt both of those films' global box office. Now, I think that's most of the news I wanted to get to. It hasn't been a very big news day. The other piece of news that came out has to do with not casting. And you probably have seen it, and it's Emily Blunt has come out and said that she and her husband, John Krasinski, are not are not set up to do the Fantastic Four movie. There have been no calls. There have been no conversations. And she went on to say that while she originally was supposed to be in Iron Man 2, she was obsessed with the movie Iron Man. She wanted to be in it, but contractual problems, she couldn't be in it, and it went to Scarlett Johansson, the role of Black Widow. She doesn't necessarily know if superhero movies are the thing for her, and that maybe her and John won't be doing. I mean, she doesn't come out and say it's not happening. Well, she does, but she kind of hints that. And I know a lot of people are going, "Oh, she says she won't do it," and and she does talk about how there is an oversaturation of superhero shows, and I've got a little problem with that. And not so much. Well, they refer to comic book shows, and I don't believe comic books are a genre, just like I don't believe superheroes are a genre. I think they are in the same way that police movies are. Comparing Ant-Man to The Boys, or, I mean, you get different genres. Genre movies are heist movies and westerns and stuff like that. I don't see, where police movies are, Police Academy and Training Day are very different movies, and I wouldn't consider them the same. But she hedges just enough that I think if Marvel showed up with a dump truck full of money, they would go, "Oh yeah, we can do that movie." Leonard asks, who would you cast as Mr. Fantastic in the MCU? Wow. See, I'm horrible about that because I always look at the comic. Now, I enjoyed Ian Goffard's role as, when he did it. I thought he was a good, I don't necessarily hate those movies. They're not great, but they're all right. I enjoyed them well enough. I thought the cast was pretty good. Mr. Fantastic, I want him to be a little older. Well, it really comes down to the era they do it in. Because I've seen so many different ideas on how to do it. Some of them have the story set in the 1950s and then jumps forward. They get trapped somewhere and then come back in modern day, stuff like that. He says Adrian Brody or John Barrowman could carry the part. I love John Barrowman. Just absolutely adore everything he does. I've met him and he was super sweet, just a great guy. And I would go see John Barrowman in just about anything. That said, I don't know about him for Mr. Fantastic. I'd like to see, I'd like someone with a little more gravitas. Adrian Brody, on the other hand, I think could pull it off. Yeah, those are good choices. Yeah, I could go with either one of those. I like John Krasinski. I do like the idea. I know it's fan casting. I know everybody ran up and down just saying, they were it and all that, and it's not. I know it's not a done deal, and I mean, they just came out and said that, but they would be good choices. I wouldn't have said John Krasinski until I saw the Jack Ryan series. Once I saw the Jack Ryan series, I was much more on board with the idea of John Krasinski. The problem is that I don't know a lot of the actors out there anymore. There are a lot of young actors, and it really comes down to what Marvel wants to do. Is this going to be a group of young actors just becoming the part? Is this going to be something like they've been trapped in the negative zone for years and come back? So they could go a lot of different ways. They could go older and have an older squad. They could go younger. So, but I like the idea of Adrian Brody. Like I said, I love the idea of John Barrowman, but I'm also like a fan of Bruce Campbell. So I would go see Bruce Campbell in anything, but I don't think Bruce Campbell should be Mr. Fantastic. A lot of these movies, I come back to Matt Bomer. I think Matt Bomer is an actor that, he plays Negative Man in the Doom Patrol, and he's doing a lot of these voices and stuff. But there was a while there that he was talked about for Superman or for Batman, and I think he should be one of these characters. I think Matt Bomer would be a great lead for one of these movies. So would he be Mr. Fantastic? He may be a little too good looking for that. I have to think on that one. I don't think I have a good casting for it, but all right. But thanks for bringing that up. I'm going to drift over towards the main topic for today, but before I get to that, I want to remind you folks that we have an Instagram account, and we'd love to have you follow it. It is at @the_EXP1. At @the_EXP1. And we're posting pictures there all the time. We've got someone doing our social media. It's a great place to hang out, so check it out. Also, we have our mailing list. We'd love for you to sign up for, so you can get the latest news, what we've got coming up. We got some big events coming up here, including one to celebrate Asian American History Month, I think is the way it's put. Sorry if that's a little insensitive, but we're going to be doing that. There's going to be a lot of big announcements coming up. And to get on our mailing list, just go to the comicshoppingexperience.com. You can see in the chat, there's our Instagram, but the comicshoppingexperience.com. And you can go to, I think it's pretty high. Kyle moved it up on the list. So you just go and sign up on the mailing list and you will get notifications. So that said, we are going to move into our main topic for today. And our main topic is going to be The Black Knight. With the release of the Eternals trailer, we got to see Richard Madden as Icarus. We got to see Kamal Najani as Congo, and Gemma Chan as Cersei. All these great characters and actors and stuff. We didn't really get to see much of Kit Harington, who's going to be playing Dane Whitman. And I realized that for a movie as big as The Eternals, they're selling the idea of The Eternals. They haven't really spent much time selling us on Dane Whitman. So I figured, hey, I've got a show. I got, 45 minutes left. Let me tell you guys about Dane Whitman. Now, Dane's one of my favorite. I love the Black Knight as a character, but I've always been big onto, I grew up reading like King Arthur and Robin Hood. So when I got into comics, mythological characters, Thor and stuff like that caught my attention. But Dane Whitman, the Black Knight, because of his connections to Arthurian legend, and of course archers have always been there too. But Dane's a long-standing Marvel comic character who's been around in one form or another since the 1950s. He actually, the first Black Knight was actually a comic from Atlas, which would become Marvel Comics. The character would float around a bit, would be brought in later on as a different character for a while, different person, and then eventually Dane gets the role. And he's been, part of a lot of different super teams too, which I think is kind of a fascinating aspect to the character. He's been part of the Avengers, the Defenders, the New Excalibur, Heroes for Hire, which seemed kind of strange, the Ultra Force, which is part of the Ultraverse, which was the Malibu Comics universe that Marvel bought out, kind of brought into the thing for a little bit and went, never mind, and put it back away. And he's also been part of the Masters of Evils, and that last one's going to take a little bit of explaining. So let's start with exactly what a Black Knight is. Now, Black Knight, Marvel didn't, Stan Lee didn't suddenly come up with the name the Black Knight. The Black Knight is a concept that's been around since medieval times. And what it is a knight who hides his face. He doesn't wear a banner or a flag or anything that shows you who he is or who his lord is or king is. He's basically a wet works version of a knight. And he goes off and he does the nasty stuff. He does the assassinations. He does the rape, pillage, and plundering. He does the work that the king doesn't want you to know he's ordering. And most of the time, it's one of his normal knights who just puts on a different garb and goes out without identifying markings. So this is opposed to the term white knight, which we all know pretty well, which is the good guy. Well, this is the bad guy, or this is the guy that does the bad things. Now, in the Marvel Universe, the very first Black Knight is Sir Percy of Scandia. Now, this, of course, Sir Percy of the Round Table, King Arthur's Knights, that's the guy. And he would do King Arthur's dirty work. He was given a sword crafted by Merlin himself from what they called the Star Stone, which I assume is like a meteorite, because that's what you do in comics. But the sword ends up being cursed, and that's one of the big aspects of the character. But we'll get to that more later on. Now, the title of the Black Knight gets passed down since after Sir Percy. It goes down in the family lines and eventually ends up with a guy named Nathan Garrett, or Nate Garrett. And he inherits Garrett Castle. Kind of makes sense. And he is then finds the body of Sir Percy and the sword, and he goes to pull it out, and he can't. And he finds out that he's supposed to get the mantle of the Black Knight. Well, turns out he can't pull the sword because, like in Marvel Comics, mystical weapons have a worthy clause. And this cat ain't worthy. He's a bad guy. But he likes the term Black Knight, so he makes himself a costume and a robotic flying horse, like you do, and makes weapons and stuff, and goes out and becomes a bad guy. He joins the Masters of Evil. He fights against Giant Man and Iron Man, and just a really bad guy until right before he dies, and he repents, and I'm sorry, I'm a horrible person, and he dies. They actually put that in the comic. He actually repents before he dies. Well, then the family, the estate, Garrett Castle and all that goes to his nephew. Because obviously this guy wasn't a nice enough guy to have a wife and kids. Now, Dane Whitman is the nephew. And this version is credited to Roy Thomas, George Tuska, and John Verpoorten. Not actually come across his name much. And he appeared the first time in Avengers number 47. Now, when he inherits the castle, he finds his uncle's notes, and he goes, oh, look, my uncle was a bad guy named the Black Knight. How horrible as this is. And then he finds Sir Percy's tomb, and he's able to pull out the blade, and as soon as he does, Percy pops up and tells him all about being the Black Knight and the rundown, and talk about your weird days. I mean, you ever inherited a family heirloom like that? Not me. Now, he decides to become a hero. And the first thing he does is join the Master of Evil. to destroy them from the inside. Now, I'm not sure why this was his plan, but he does this, and it kind of does it to aid the Avengers, and eventually he gets on their good side, and then he helps them defeat Kang the Conqueror, and they gain his trust, and he would end up being an Avenger and serve multiple terms with the Avengers over the years. But that's not anywhere near as weird as some of the stuff he gets into. I mean, this character's history is just out there. At one point, he's fighting alongside the Defenders against the Enchantress, and he gets turned into stone. And his fellow heroes get busy quickly divvying up his stuff. Valkyrie takes his flying horse, Aragon. Yeah, by the way, this cat gets flying horses, where his uncle decided to make one. He's got he actually gets a real life flying horse. Anyway, so he gets this horse. Valkyrie takes the horse Aragorn, also takes the ebony blade. Doctor Strange takes the statue itself and takes it back to the Sanctum Sanctorum and puts it in the library, where it really pulls the decor together or something. And he's stuck there in a statue for all these years until and they find out that his spirit has actually been sent back to the 12th century into his ancestor, Eobard Garrington. And other than in comics, where do you find the name Eobard? Eobar Thawne, Eobard Garrington. That's about the only time I've ever come across the name Eobar. Anyway, a lot of weird stuff happens. He ends up being sent by Merlin in the body of Eobar to the future to help a lost hero, Captain Britain. And they battle Mordred, because it's always Mordred. And they save Camelot. And then at one point, he ends up being pulled into the Contest of Champions, the original one, with the Grandmaster versus the Collector. And eventually he gets returned to his own body and made flesh and blood once again, where he goes and he collects his sword, but goes ahead and leaves the horse with Valkyrie and gets himself a new one from the Lady in the Lake. Dude, I don't make this up. I'm just reading the history for you. Now, back in the modern day and with the Avengers, during a big major lineup shift, Dane has been successfully keeping the ebony blade at bay by not killing anybody with it. But that changes where his new buddy Namor borrows the blade to slay his wife Marina, who's turned into a giant Leviathan. Now, Marina was an original member, or was a member of the Alpha Flight team, who was an aquatic character, ended up with Namor and just transformed into a Leviathan, like you do. And of course, this would awaken the curse of the blade again. And the more Dane used the blade, the more it started taking over him. And he ended up basically turning into a statue again. That's the second time. 2 statues in one lifetime. That's pretty weird. Mark says, enjoying the overview. I had the pleasure of meeting. Oh, hey, Mark, how you doing? Ventura Comic-Con years ago. Right. Good to see you, sir. Glad you're on board listening. All right, so now he's a statue again, and he ends up being possessed by the spirit of Percy for a while before being returned whole, and Percy taking the curse away. So Percy comes in and goes, hey, you're kind of a statue again. Let me borrow your body for a little bit. And then when I'm done, and he kind of saves him at the end. Well, Dane ends up with the Avengers again, and this time he ends up in a love triangle. But the love triangle is with Crystal of the Inhumans and Cersei of the Eternals, because that's just Dane Whitman's life. Now, Crystal is still married to Pietro Quicksilver at this time, and their daughter Luna gets kidnapped. And where Dane is kind of more for Crystal, Cersei is being driven insane, and Icarus shows up and says, well, if we're going to save Cersei, we need to do a mind meld, a psychic link with someone. And it ends up being Dane. So he ends up in a psychic link with Cersei, and Crystal ends up going back to Pietro. And then after all of this, and they find out that the person who's pushing Cersei to being insane is an evil version of Dane Whitman from another universe called the Proctor. And when they defeat the Proctor, Cersei says, I'm still kind of screwed up. Let's go exile ourselves for a while. And Dane goes, okay, I'll go with you now that we're mentally bonded. And they end up in the Ultraverse. They got exiled to an entire different comic universe. I'm sure all of this sounded good when they were writing it, when Roger Stern was writing it. But when you look back, you go, oh my, yeah. Okay, well, from here, he would have many more strange things happen to him, like replacing the Ebony blade for a while with a lightsaber. You guys remember that? He joined Heroes for Hire. He was part of the new Excalibur team. He turns out he was carrying a fake version of the Ebony Blade crafted by Dracula. That was for a little while he did that. He found out that he had an actual stone heart that Cersei gave him so that he would remain above it all and uninvolved. Yeah, so the girl dumps him and leaves him with a stone heart. Now, he also slowly went insane because of the blade. At one point, he went to a place called Weird World. He helped the Euroforce fight Hydra when Captain America became a Hydra agent. And he ended up with the Phoenix Force for a while. So, yeah. I think that's more than one movie. I think that would be a lot. It's kind of complicated. That would definitely be Dane Whitman's profile. It's complicated. So let's take a look at the movie, which, while you think that this big ensemble pick would have enough going on, you don't need to introduce a character like Dane Whitman. Yes, Leonard, thank you. Black Panther did have the Ebony Blade for a while. A few people have borrowed it. It also became part of, I think, the King in Black story that just happened. I know Black Panther was the Black Knight was a big part of the King in Black story, and actually has get to the point where he accepts that he's the bad, he's darkness at this point. That he's not a good guy. Which, if he had actually read the definition of the Black Knight, he would know he's not the good guy. But so they're introduced. So you've got this huge concept with the Eternals. There's all these Celestials they got to deal with. They got all this stuff to introduce. But Kevin Feige has said that if there was a lead in the film, it would be Cersei, played by Gemma Chan. Now, the first thing that's interesting here is that Gemma Chan has actually been in the Marvel Universe before. She's played Minerva in the Captain Marvel movie. Now, I don't know if they'll actually address that in some bizarre way, or if they'll just go, we don't remember that. Either way, the connection there is kind of strange. And so if Cersei's the lead, and we're introducing all these big cosmic things, then there's a good chance that they're introducing Dane Whitman, here played by Kit Harington from Game of Thrones. Jon Snow, you know nothing. And we know that they're both teachers at the same place, and that there's some kind of love connection between him and Cersei. There's photos we've seen of them kissing. Well, there's a good chance that Whitman is going to be the audience connection character. When you're looking at centuries-old characters and you're trying to relate to them, that could be difficult. But if you try to relate to the guy who just happened to fall in love with one of these people, then it's a little bit easier, because then you kind of get it. And it'll also humanize Cersei as well, and therefore the rest of the Eternals. So I think it's a great idea to introduce the character Dane Whitman. I think he'll actually be a good part of the movie, in that it'll be a good way to get the audience connected, but also you're connecting him in the bigger scope of things as well. You're setting up what could be a major character going forward. JD says, I've always found Thor to be a spitting image of myself. of me. I want to know where you buy your mirrors. That is awesome. So Feige has hinted that Whitman's going to be important to the MCU. And it makes sense. I mean, we've lost a lot of the big heroes. We don't know exactly how it's going to all pan out. And I think there's a good chance that Dane Whitman and Cersei are going to be part of any new Avenger team we get going forward. Now, the thing is that the Black Knight is kind of a mix of these characters. Captain America is the pure heart, and that's kind of Dane's thing. He wants to be the pure heart. He wants to be the White Knight, even though he's the Black Knight. You've also got the mystical weapon aspect from Thor, even the Worthy Claws. So you get that. He's smart. He's tech savvy. He's kind of almost on Iron Man. They pull him in as kind of a low-level Iron Man for his smarts in that sense. So you get that. So you're mixing to the three biggies in the Avengers in one character. So, plus Kit Harington is very popular. And Marvel will likely want to use him a lot going forward. So I have a feeling that from this movie, they've already talked about a second Eternals movie. But I think the characters that'll be able to be pulled out of it, you don't want to take all of the Eternals. It's the thing with the Guardians of the Galaxy. When they're a team and you really don't break them up. But we only got Rocket and Nebula for most of Endgame. Because you can't have that giant team dropped in to the middle of the Avengers movie. Well, from the Eternals movie, you could take Cersei and the Black Knight, leave the rest in their own little thing, and have them play in the rest of the universe. So I kind of see that's how they're going to go. At least that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, you got to take a quick pause, take a drink. I am not sponsored by Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, but if they would like to, we could talk. All right. Let me give you guys the lineup for after the show. I got more to talk about on this, but just so you know what's coming up later tonight, we have a new sales show debuting after this. This will be doing at 3 o'clock Pacific time, 6 o'clock Eastern. It's called The Dashman Comics. So you want to tune in for that. And then afterwards, we, of course, have Rupp's World. So that'll be our lineup for this evening, The Dashman Comics and Rupp's World following today's Dan Wickline Show. Let me give you guys some recommended reading, but I'm going to start with a review. Since we're on the Black Knight, this is the first 2 issues of the new Black Knight comic series that is out right now. I wasn't kidding when I said I'm a fan of the Black Knight. I love this book. I love the character. Saying I love this book may have been a little quick. Curse of the Ebony Blade. This is written by Cy Spurrier. It's drawn by Sergio Davila. I'm a huge fan of Sergio Davila. I actually had a chance to work with him back when I was doing Sinbad over at Zenescope. We were working on the second story arc, and he was starting to do covers for us. And the covers were far enough ahead that I needed to let him draw the villain for the second arc well enough in advance before we actually designed him in the book. And none of the artists, I hadn't had a chance. I think Brett Peoples was drawing the interiors at that point. We hadn't had a chance to actually get the villain Terra Mortis drawn at that point. And he was, all my villains were elemental based, and he was earth based. So I did a quick sketch of this mummy looking creature with some kind of armor on him. And I mean, my drawing skill levels is just enough to get my point across, and then I get somebody actually good to draw it. And I sent that through email to Sergio, and he came back with this gorgeous cover of this creepy looking villain. All the elements I had put on my sketch were there, but now they looked awesome. And he was about to stab this girl laying out on this slab, and just love that cover. It's one of my favorite covers from the whole Sinbad run, and Sergio was the artist on that. And he did a few other covers for us, and absolutely loved working with him. So I love seeing him over at Marvel, and his art on this book is absolutely gorgeous. If you just like buying comics for the art, definitely buy this book. Not saying don't buy it for the story. Most of the story I really enjoy, and I can't wait for the next issue. There's this good mystery going on. My problem with it is just how they start. And might be a little spoilers here, so be warned. It opens with a very depressed Dan Wickline. He's talking to a computer AI therapy recording, which basically just listens. It doesn't actually give you any advice, but it's just this therapy thing to listen to. And I don't know if that actually exists in the real world, but that's what he's talking to. And he's sitting around waiting and then he gets this call to help the Avengers, and he gets all excited and he runs over to help the Avengers, and he finds out that the only reason they called him in is because they need him to do his big ebony blade thing. They don't really care that he's there. And he gets hurt by that. And Thor and they all treat him like he's why do we have to deal with this guy? Wasn't there someone else we could have called in? I mean, Thor is literally calling him out or picking on the fact that he talks funny and all this stuff. And it's like, he's you. He's just like you. And Thor even gets upset that he can't pick up the ebony blade. So the opening, it throws me off a little bit because I have higher regard for Dan Wickline, and this is kind of treats him like a loser. You know, I just watched the Venom movie the other night, and how Venom tells Eddie Brock, well, you're a loser. He starts off as a loser in this, and I don't want to say too much more, but the story itself, pretty sure Iron Man called him a DC character. Not familiar with that. That's pretty funny. So he helps the Avengers, stuff like that. And then this guy shows up who has the ability to tell you the worst thing about yourself and makes you question, and you get all depressed. And he does that to Dane, and Dane's like, oh, that's a cool power. Doesn't work on me because I'm already hate myself. And like I said, I don't want to give away too much more, but the story here involves the history of the Ebony Blade, obviously from Curse of the Ebony Blade title. They bring in Elsa Bloodstone. There's, connection to Sir Percy. There's connection to the medieval times and the Arthurian legends and stuff. It's a good story. I don't like the initial version of how they're treating Dane. I didn't get a chance to read his appearance in The King in Black, so there's a chance that this is kind of just where they're going with the character. All right, but once you get past that, it's an intriguing story. There's some interesting characters, and I can't wait to see where this goes next. So I'm two issues in. I do recommend it. So if you haven't had a chance to pick this up yet, check your local comic shop. And if you don't know where your local comic shop is, go to the comicbookshoplocator.com and just put in your zip code. They will tell you where your nearest shops are. So I do recommend this. At least so far, I'm enjoying it. Pick these up. Other Black Knight books you can look for. If you want to go back into some of the old school stories, there's Avengers Epic Collection, The Gatherer's Strike. This one actually it's thecomicshoplocator.com. Kyle's just put it into the chat, so if you want to click on that link. But the Avengers Epic Collection, The Gatherer's Strike, this collects Avengers 360 through 366. I'm suddenly becoming Sean Connery. 360 through 366. This shows Cersei. No, I can't keep going with that. So this is basically how this is where Cersei and the bond. I think they call it the Gan Josin bond, where to save her life. So if you want that story, that's all takes place right there. So that's the Avengers Epic Collection, The Gatherer Strikes. When do you expect the Black Knight movie to hit theaters? Mark, wow, that's a good question. We're going to get the Eternals movie in November. I think if they are going to do a Black Knight movie, they would probably roll it out pretty quickly. JD, you're going to tempt me to do an Arnold imitation. Now I'm trying to think of it in my head. The Governator. Yes, we can do all the different voices here if you want. The Black Knight sounds like more like a Disney TV show. Okay, yeah, they could do them as a TV show, but I think with Kit Harington, they might do them as a movie. But they've got so many things in the works. There's that rumor that there's like 20 plus movies in the works. I would think if they did a movie and they announced it right after Eternals and they were going to do it parallel, we'd probably see it 2025, maybe late 2024. Yeah, I think to me, that's, I don't think we'd get it any sooner than that because we've got movies already slated out through 2023. I'd like to see a Black Knight. I'd love to see them go back and do the whole medieval thing, the whole going back into Camelot, stuff like that. That would be a lot of fun. And we know that Kit Harington can do that kind of stuff. So I'm all over that. If you want to read about the origin of Dane Whitman and his time infiltrating the Masters of Evil and stuff like that, that is collected in Avengers Epic Collection, Masters of Evil. Real clever naming there. If you want to read something that's more specific to the Black Knight, there is The Fall of Dane Whitman, which was written by Frank Thierry and Luca Pizzari. And this is all about Dane's addiction to the ebony blade and how it's getting too much, and he looks for answers both in the legacy of the Black Knight and Weird World. So remember I mentioned Weird World earlier? This is where all of that takes place, and this is Frank Thierry's writing. And there's also a one-shot that came out called Black Knight Exodus, and it's an interesting one-shot because this is Dane and Cersei as they find themselves back during the Crusades. And it's dealing with the X-Men's villains, Apocalypse and Exodus. So there's a handful of interesting Black Knight collections out there. JD. I feel like I should respond to that, but I probably shouldn't at the same time. It's a good joke, though, JD. I'll give you that. Before I move on, do you guys have any questions about the Black Knight? I did a bunch of reading on him. Is there a core villain that the Black Knight faces? Who is his antagonist? Good question. His character is always, it's absolutely, and it's answered on the second page of the new comic. It's Mordred the Mystic. that's his basic bad guy is Mordred. And they literally say in here is, it's Mordred, isn't it? And Percy goes, well, of course it's Mordred. It's always Mordred. So yeah, Mordred the Mystic is his nemesis. And Mordred, if you're not familiar with the character, if you're not into the Arthurian legends, Mordred is the son of why is her name slipping my mind? It's Arthur's half sister. Morgana. Thank you. So he's the son of Morgana, and he's probably the second best sorcerer of that era after Merlin and Morgana. After Merlin and Morgana, he's like the next level. So that's pretty much who he ends up going up against. And that Marvel's used him in that way all the time. So if you're doing a Black Knight story, then you're probably getting Mordred as the bad guy. And it looks like he's going to be the bad guy in the new series as well. So sorry for spoilers. He asked. Yeah. Well, and that was perfect timing because, like I said, is there any other questions you guys have or anything else you'd like to talk about? We've got about another 10, 15 minutes of the show, and I've kind of covered all the news. I like Dane Whitman a lot. I'm hoping that they're going to, make him the heroic version that we see in the comics most of the time. I do find it interesting that they've tried to change him up quite a bit. In the Roger Stern, John Buscema era, they kind of downplayed. He was the Black Knight, but they downplayed him being the Black Knight. They got rid of the ebony blade. They gave him this tech saber. It was basically a lightsaber. And he wore an Avengers jacket over his armor, I guess it was. But he still wore the helmet. So instead of the classic costume, you see with the big flowing cape and stuff like that, he just basically looked like, the guy off the street. And most of the time he had the helmet off and he had the long kind of hair like this and the scraggly beard. And, he just happened to have, the lightsaber that he would pop out. And it was just very different than the Black Knight we see most of the time, which is the flying horse. He's had 3 different flying horses, by the way, if anybody wants to know about that. He had Aragorn, who he ended up giving to Valkyrie, or allowing Valkyrie to keep. He had Valinor, who I'm not sure exactly what ended up with Valinor. And then finally he ended up with Strider, which is his current horse. And I do note that if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, Aragorn and Strider were the same character in Lord of the Rings. Just an observation there. Yeah. I am curious what Cy Spurrier is doing with the ebony blade in this. I'd love to get Cy on here to talk about it too. Kyle, do we have contact with Cy? Maybe we could invite him on the show. Never personally got to chat with him, but that would be a lot of fun. Okay. So since we have gone through that, let's go ahead and talk about the comic industry. Now, I'm sure substitute Kyle. Oh, no Kyle today. Okay. I am sorry. I just always assume that the faceless voice out there is Kyle, but you've been doing a great job, so thank you. Getting into comics is interesting. I get that question a lot on how you break into comics. And it's funny. You go up to any writer and they're going to give you their story, and it's going to be 100% different than the next person's. There's kind of a way to do it, and then there's these outlandish ways that happen. And my outlandish story has to do with an author named Brian Holguin, who great guy. Did a lot of stuff over at Top Cow, stuff like that. And he's doing stuff again with the Aria comics. I interviewed him once, and I asked him, I said, how'd you get into comics? And mind you, you have to understand that his way of getting into comics was a little different in that he was already a writer. He was writing for Rolling Stone. He was writing articles for Rolling Stone. And one day he realized that Top Cow was across the street. And he decided to walk over and asked if they need any writers. And according to him, he walked in, he asked the receptionist, they called over to the managing editor, and the guy said, yeah, I do. What's your background? And next thing you know, he was working for Top Cow. That is not the way you get into the comic industry. That is the way Brian Holguin got into the industry. And mind you, one of his credits at that point was having interviewed President Ronald Reagan. So that gets you in the door. If you don't have that, you have to do the more classic thing, which is get published. And it's one of those irritating things. It's kind of like when you first are trying to get a job and they ask you what your experience was. You're like, no, this would be my first job. And well, you need experience to get a job. Well, you have to have a job to get experience. With comics, it's similar, except you can look at it like a ladder. You start off by just getting yourself published, even if it's self-published. And that's what I did. In the 1990s, when I was getting into comics, I found a bunch of other artists and writers through my local comic shop, comicshoplocator.com, and started working on books together, figured out how diamond worked, figured out how coloring and lettering. And in the 90s, I learned all the jobs in comics because I wanted to be in comics. So I learned how to ink. I learned how to letter. I learned how to color. And the first few books I published, I did a lot of the work on. I mean, I wrote the scripts. I had artists that drew the books, but I did background art on them. I did inking. I didn't ink the old books, but I would do background inking, stuff like that, because the job needed to get done. I figured out how to letter, first by hand lettering and then computer lettering. I had a great sit down with Robin Spihar, who gave me a lot of pointers on that. I learned how to color using an old computer and Photoshop, and eventually got to the point where, I was talking to Diamond and stuff, and I got a book published. It was one book. It sold absolutely crap, and we didn't do another one for 4 years. But I learned a lot. Then a couple years later came along, and I was back at it again. We went black and white. We had other artists and stuff like that. I was still writing. I was still coloring. I was still lettering. But we put out about 3 or 4 books. And again, they didn't sell well. It was the late 90s, and the comic market was crashing. So it wasn't a great time. But I was able to take those comics and go to IDW and Zenescope and Avatar and say, look, I can do comics. This is my work right here. This is my, well, not this one, but I could hold up a printed comic and say, this is my comic. I can do what you need. This is what you're producing, and I can do it. And that's how I got in the door, was I put out my own books and worked my way up. And that's why I talk about working as a ladder, in that you start off doing the first few, and work your way up. Then you take your books that you get with Avatar and Zenescope, and you take that over to Dark Horse. You take that over to Image. And you take those books over to Marvel and DC. Now, JD asks, do writers today need an agent or manager in order to be considered for a writing gig at any of the, say, top 5? Absolutely not. In truth, most editors look at you kind of fun, and this is a horrible thing to say, but most editors seem surprised if you have an agent or a manager. I have never had an agent or a manager get me work in the comic industry. It's not the way this industry works. Outside of it, absolutely. You want to get TV work, you want to get novels, you want to get movies, anything like that. Yes, an agent will help you in that sense. Comics is much more word of mouth. You're just as likely to get work because they saw your book. Most publishers send their books to the other publishers. There's a reason why you can look through Marvel books right now and find most of the artists have credits at Dynamite and Zenescope, because that's how they got in. And because the editors are looking at the comics on the shelves and finding their next person. For me, the Top Cow, how I got work at Top Cow, I went up to Matt Hawkins at a convention, introduced myself, and asked him if I could send him samples of my work. When he said yes, it went from there. And that's just how it works. You agents and stuff, they don't usually work in this industry. So my substitute Kyle, how much more time do I have today? I know we're getting close, but I don't know if my time is the same. Three minutes. Thank you. Okay, so let me start wrapping this up. I want to remind you again that we have our Instagram channel. We'd love for you to follow us there. It's at @the_exp1. Also, we have our mailing list, which is comicshoppingexperience.com. So you go there, sign up for our mailing list, and they will let us know. We will let you know everything coming up, like tonight's schedule, which tonight's show will be followed by the Dashman Comics and then Roops World. So please stick around for that. I appreciate all of you joining me today for the second episode of the Dan Wickline Show. I will be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We will talk about the Bad Batch and whatever other news happens between now and then. Also, any of your guys' questions. If you have things you'd like me to cover or talk about, you can reach me. You can ask me during the show, or if it's something you think is more in depth or a suggestion for a topic for the show, feel free to reach out to me. My social media stuff is my name. I'm Dan Wickline on just about everything, so you can find me there. Reach out, and if you have an idea for a topic for the show, I'd love to hear it. Again, thank you all for joining me and for coming out for this first week of the show. I hope you guys are enjoying it, and thank you to Substitute Kyle. I don't know what your name is, but I appreciate you being here and helping me out here. And I think I will wrap it up there so we can run a couple commercials before the next show. Thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.